Zelus is an AoE focused mage for the cultist faction, and in this video we're going to go over everything you need to know about Zelus, including how to build him, about his stats, his skill ups, what's needed, what awakenings are beneficial to him, where he's best used, and how to use him. So with that, we're going to start off by talking about his faction, which is the cultist faction, or the cult faction. There are 3 lords for this faction, so you can use the rare Nero just to get 5% bonus stats, which will help a lot. And you can also get 15% bonus damage to slowed, stunned, frozen, and immobilized enemies. These effects just scale up with the higher rarity, so an epic one will grant 10% stats instead of 5 and 20% damage instead of 15. And if you're fortunate enough to have Morrigan, it is 15% stat increase, 30% damage to CC'd enemies, and she also outright increases AoE damage dealt by 25%, so you can see incredible synergy between them there. So obviously Zelus is in the perfect faction for his kit. He is very clearly an AoE mage. But let's first look at his stats before we get to his skills. So this is pretty much the main and almost only drawback to Zelus, his stats. He has a block of 1, which doesn't matter. He's a platform hero, but he has a cost of 29. That is cripplingly high, incredibly high. So if you're using Zelus in any content where cost matters, you really need to be using a cost hero. The rare Navi is a great option, and from the epics there is Dalin and Cyrene. It does make him slightly difficult to place and to use and to find teams for in a lot of content. So Zelus is not a general hero. He's not someone you're going to be using everywhere, but that doesn't mean he's bad. I think it's very easy to overlook Zelus just because his cost is too high to be used in places like most campaign stages. However, he does have his niches and he is very good in those areas. So I think the cost is definitely prohibitive and definitely a problem for Zelus, but again, that does not make him useless. He has some very good benefits. In terms of his actual base stats, the only 3 stats we really care about for Zelus outside of his cost are going to be his attack interval, and his rage regen. So to start things off, his attack, well, his attack appears to be pretty much average for legendary mages, which is a bit higher, about 25% higher than some of the epic mages such as Iona at 6-star max promotion, max level. So nothing too unusual or special here to report. It is kind of hard to tell with attack though, because it really depends on how the individual skills actually scale off of that attack. So it could be very high attack, but it might not scale as well. Zelus focuses on AoE damage, so the scaling is actually lower, but he's hitting many targets at once, so it makes up for it overall. But generally his attack seems to be okay. Next up, we'll talk about rage regen since it's simpler. If you're curious what rage regen auto is, this is just the amount of rage that is produced per second passively. Just by Zelus standing still, not doing anything, not attacking, not taking damage, he should be gaining around 14 rage per second. This seems to be completely standard across all mages, so nothing new there. But the main one here is his attack interval. It is 5, and it is fixed at 5. He cannot have this reduced. It is always going to be 5 seconds between each of his attacks. There are a few mages that do actually have prevention on this. They can't reduce their attack interval by getting attack speed, but this does actually matter to Zelus. There is a reason for it. So that covers his stats. There's nothing special really to talk about here. His cost is very high. Other than that, it's kind of standard stuff. So moving on to Zelus's skills, he does not have a talent. Talents are kind of like an additional passive. So legendaries normally have a basic attack, an ultimate, and 2 passives, and sometimes they'll have a talent as well, which is kind of just like a third passive, but sometimes it plays into the rest of the skills of the hero. Zelus doesn't have one. So moving on, we have his basic attack, which is AoE magic attack. Attacks generate a ground effect area dealing 25% AoE damage per second to multiple enemies for 5 seconds. Airborne units take half, and basic attacks are not affected by the attack speed bonuses. So the interesting thing to see here is his fixed at 5-second duration. He has a 5-second interval, so roughly he'll always have one area down dealing 25% AoE damage. That way they cannot stack. You can only have one of these ground effects down at a time, which is important for something else. So next up we have his ultimate, running Styx. It has a rage cap of 1,000, which can be reduced down to 900. He has a starting rage of 300, so on placement he will start with 300 out of 1,000 rage, and at max skill ups that will be 500 out of 900 rage, so very close to being able to ult immediately, which is pretty good. And by default it lasts for 10 seconds. So what does it do? Well, it's a manually activated ultimate, and it creates a very large area of effect in front of Zelus that deals a burst of damage when it is first cast of 100% up to 120% at max skill ups, and afterwards it deals 50 to 60% damage every single second for 10 seconds. So he does between 600 to 720% damage from his ultimate in a massive area over 10 seconds. It's a pretty good amount of damage. It's not incredible, but it's not bad. It's actually a very decent amount of damage. The main thing is it's just 10 seconds, which is slightly too long for some content, but it's good, and the reach is fantastic. The range on running Styx is really good and can be very, very useful. So here's where some of the utility and some of the interesting kind of overlaps between these skills take place. His passives. Nevermark. Increase the damage caused by ground effect area by 6% per second, up to 10% per second. So you may not know exactly what this means, but basically his AoE magic attack lasts for 5 seconds. at max skill up, every single one of those seconds, which is ticking for 25% damage, every second it will increase by 10% damage. So at the end of the 5 seconds, it's 50% damage bonus. It's doing a lot more damage over the duration. When he fires the next basic attack, it will reset that counter. His ultimate is also a ground effect AoE. As you can see, generates ground effect area. So that is also ticking up by 10% per second for 10 seconds. So it's increasing the damage by 100%. So when we said it can go up to 720% damage after 10 seconds, it's actually pretty good. This is a lot of damage because these effects are stacking up. The Never Marks are increasing the damage per second of the running Styx, as this debuff effectively is just piling up on the enemy. So that's really good. There's a good synergy between this and the long duration of his damage instances. And finally, his second passive, Soul Corruption. All enemies in the ground effect area, so again, both his basic attack and his ultimate, gain vulnerability to magic damage. This makes enemies take 10% more magic damage, and at max skill ups it's 14%. So it's complete synergy. All of his skills completely overlap, all of these passives overlap, and there's really good synergy. The only negative thing I can say about vulnerability to magic damage is I think it's the most common. There are two magic damage focused debuffs. There is vulnerability and there is reducing the resistance. So you can reduce the enemy's resistance to magic damage and you can make them more vulnerable to magic damage. So you can stack those two effects to maximize your damage. Both Mary and Iona and Valkyria apply vulnerability to magic damage. They will not stack, so only one of those will be actually effective at a time. And Zelus, although he applies it the easiest, other than perhaps Valkyria, although his is a much bigger range than Valkyria's is, I think his is one of the weaker amounts. 10 to 14% is fairly low compared to some of the other heroes. So although this is really nice, there are other ways of getting this debuff into your team. Mary is kind of a common hero to use, so I don't think this is as good as some of the rest of his kit, but it is definitely good. It makes it easier to field a team because you don't have to find a way to get this debuff. Zelus will provide it. So overall, he's got a pretty good skill kit. He does debuff in a really helpful way for Gear Raid 1, and he does really good damage, pretty high damage over a longer period of time. So overall, he has a really good AoE kit. I think that's undisputable. It's a great AoE kit and fantastic range on his ultimate as well, which can be incredibly useful for certain content. Before we move on to Awakenings, let's talk about skill ups. Where do you stop upgrading Zelus with skill ups, and what is the most beneficial? Well, in my opinion, running Styx is obviously the most important. This is going to improve his damage by a massive amount, so this is the priority. If you're going to use him a lot, especially if you're relying on him as your main damage dealer, you need running Styx. This ideally should be leveled up. I don't think Zelus has priority over many other legendaries for skill ups. For example, I focused on my Morrigan and Salazar first. But if you really need the AoE damage and you have a Zelus, do not shy away from it. He is valuable. He is very good at GR1. It's well worth it if he's your main damage dealer in that content. Next, I would suggest the Never Mark. This is pretty good. This is increasing his damage. This is scaling per second for either 5, 6, 10 or 12 seconds depending on your awakenings, but primarily 5 and 10 seconds. So every one of these you can times by 5 or 10 in terms of how much it's increasing by the final tick. So it's pretty good. This does help damage quite a lot. So I would say primarily running Styx, and I would honestly say if you can get this maxed, I would leave it there personally. If it rolls into the Never Mark, that's pretty good. I don't think Soul Corruption is that big of a priority just because, as I said, you can get it from other sources that are easier to come by, such as Mary, who is applying 10% as well. So yeah, that's my suggestion. His ultimate is worth skilling up, and after that I would suggest stopping, but maybe you can go for Never Mark if you really do rely on Zelus heavily. So now that we've covered his skills, let's take a look at his awakenings. So the first one is increases ground effects duration on basic attacks by 1 second. So that might sound like, oh, well, you get to overlap your effects. You do. Previously they lasted for 5 seconds and you had an interval of 5 seconds. Now there's a 1 second extra gap, which allows for slight overlap. That'll be some gain in DPS. However, the main benefit of this is that the passive will have another second to tick over. So this Never Mark will be gaining another 6 to 10% extra damage on that final second. It's not insane, but it is just extra DPS, right? You're gaining another second on all of your attacks, so that's going to be adding a percentage increase to your damage, and you'll be gaining another second stacking of that debuff, so that'll be extending the DPS even further. So the first awakening is pretty good. It definitely increases his DPS by a notable margin. The second awakening is 5% bonus attack, more attack is always good, and the third awakening increases his running Styx duration by 2 seconds. Again, really good. That is 2 seconds extra of dealing between 50 to 60% damage per second, so that's a noteworthy damage increase, but also another 2 seconds stacking up that debuff. So again, that's up to 10% extra per second, so up to 20% bonus damage on the final tick. It helps, it all adds up, it all increases the damage he does. I think it is genuinely pretty good. These two together are just increasing the effectiveness of his passive as well as prolonging the damage instances. So yeah, I think these are pretty good. The first 3 awakenings are all quite nice. The 4th awakening reduces his cost by 3, so he goes from 29 to 26, which makes him a bit easier to use, but it's not quite enough. I think if it was 5, it would be a bigger deal. 3 doesn't make him significantly easier to use outside of the gear raids, for example, or basic trial. But it does help, it is something, but you would hope for Awakening 4 it would be a little bit higher. And finally we have Awakening 5. This increases the AoE damage by 20% and extends the range of the AoE effects created by his basic attacks. So his basic attacks will have an even bigger range, which will be really, really good, especially in the gear raids. He'll probably be able to hit both lanes at the same time a lot easier rather than relying on him hitting the middle ones. But the 20% AoE damage increase is quite important, actually. You have to remember he is stacking up Nevermark, the passive increasing his damage. This is going to be applied to the AoE damage first, up front, and then the Nevermark will be applying afterwards. So it's not just 20% AoE damage increase, it's 20% plus however long your debuffs last for. And with all these Awakenings, that's 6 seconds on your auto debuff and 12 seconds on your ultimate. So it's actually quite huge. Overall, Zelus's Awakenings are pretty strong. Quite a lot of heroes, especially mages, have some very hit or miss Awakenings where maybe the third one is super good, or maybe just the fifth one is super good. But Zelus's Awakenings are all actually quite good. They all do add a notable increase to his DPS, aside from the fourth Awakening. I feel like if this was changed for something else, it would be better. Even just some penetration, or maybe just some attack boost, or something like that. I don't think the cost reduction is enough to really justify it, but the rest of his Awakenings are all super good. So yeah, overall, good Awakenings. So that covers an overview of his stats, his skills, his Awakenings. Next up, we'll talk a bit about my Zelus. I have two. He was the first legendary I ever pulled in the entire game and on the global server, the new server, who I pulled this weekend, 4 times in fact. So I have a pretty good idea of how Zelus performs, where he's good and how to use him. So we'll get into it. This is my Zelus. He is Awakened free. I have not been able to farm enough Myth Extract to fully promote him yet. And I have him in the Styx gear, just increasing his AoE damage by 18%. And I have him in Calamity as the weapon set. Don't focus sets too heavily. It's just at the stage I'm at, which is kind of mid-game-ish, I'm not getting good substats. So I can make sets because I can just focus primarily on the attack bonus main. And because I'm really struggling to get crit rate subs, let alone crit rate and crit damage subs, it's not too hard for me to make a set on a few heroes. So I've focused on the Styx set for him, and I've given him attack percent on all 3 mains at the moment, and I've tried to get some crit rate subs, but it's not particularly worked. But at least he has really good base attack. And similarly on the left side, I've just focused on getting as much attack as I can and taking the Calamity just for some more bonus attack. Until you can get your crit rate to 90 to 100%, it's not really worth caring about crit damage. I would like to focus more on his crit rate, but at the moment he isn't a priority gearing hero for me, so some of my better gear is on other heroes. Mainly because I've achieved what I wanted to for this point regarding Gear Raid 1, which is his main use. So now to talk about my Zelus on the Forerunner server. This is the Zelus I pulled some 10 months ago now, so I've had him a very long time. This is probably the best gear I would put on him. 0 attack speed, as you can see. It would just be entirely wasteful to have it on him. I have the Curse set, which I believe is the best set for him, increasing damage by 6% for up to 5 stacks for every enemy with an attack range. Zelus is built entirely to hit numerous enemies at once. Remember, his basic attack is only doing 25% damage per instance of damage per target. So if he's only hitting one target, it's only 25% scaling. That's not very good damage. So you definitely want to be using him against a number of enemies. If he's hitting less than 4 or 3 even enemies, he's not really going to be doing very good, and you're better off taking a single target mage. So the Curse is ideal for him. That's the scenario you're going to be using him, is when he has that many enemies in range, and he has a really good range as well. On the left side, I have Annihilating Might. That's just because it's the set I had at the time, and I wanted to pick up some more crit damage to balance out my attack a little bit, but Calamity equally would have been just fine. As for the priority in gearing, I have once again gone for all attack bonus because at end game it tends to scale a little bit better this way. Crit damage mains don't have much difference in the main stat, so from my testing I found more success with attack bonus all the way, but I have gone for 100% crit rate, and I've picked up a bunch of crit damage and subs anyway. I also have fairly high rage regen just so I can get his ult up more. That is where most of his damage comes from. So yeah, this is my Forerunner Zelus. And for Artifact, as I do have them on this account, I have the Zelus manuscript maxed. And this should be reducing the healing received by enemies by 45% while his ultimate is activated. Unfortunately, on the Forerunner server, this is not working. The Zelus manuscript does not work. The developers are aware of this, so I'm hoping it has been fixed in the global version, but I haven't pulled it yet, so I can't test. The main reason this artifact is super important is because of Gear Raid 1 stages 19 to 21, where the boss has massive healing, so being able to reduce the enemy's healing would be really good, and ideally they fix it because it would make him significantly more valuable, especially in Gear Raid 1, his main area, and he would become easily one of the best heroes in the game for Gear Raid 1 should they fix it. Just one more thing to mention on the Forerunner server, they did actually introduce another mage not too long ago known as Legendary, this guy right here, and his ultimate has a 100% healing block for 15 seconds at max skill up. So not only is it more of a heal block than Zelus with the maxed manuscript, but it is also 5 seconds longer, 3 seconds longer even than an A3 Zelus. So unfortunately, he's kind of been power crept by Legendary on the heal block front. but I believe Zelus will do more damage than Lucia overall. So back to the global server now. How would I suggest gearing Zelus? Well, if you are very early game, if you're in blue or purple gear, then just chuck him in as much flat attack as you can get. If you're in blue and purple gear, the flat attack will tend to roll out better if you can get attack bonus substats rather than as a main stat, because substats can roll quite high, and blue gear cannot be rolled past level 4, purple gear can only go to level 8, and that caps how far the main stat can go. So you're better off trying to get an attack flat main and an attack bonus substat if you want to try and gear a very early game Zelus. If you're more towards the mid game, you have yellow and red gear, so legendary and myth gear, you want to have attack bonus mains like this. You want to have as much attack bonus as you can get. Even if the substats suck, it doesn't really matter if you're just getting into farming it. And if you're able to try to make a Styx or a Curse set if you can, because they really are the two best sets for Zelus. I would not worry too much about the substats. Definitely focus on the attack bonus mains, and don't be shy to just 16 some of them early if you need to help with your progress. I certainly did on my account. Don't do it too much, but you know, getting a few of the right set to 16 can help you quite a lot. As for the left side of gear, do try to make the sets here because they are actually pretty good bonuses. 25% attack is quite decent, and try to just pick up some attack bonus if you can on the substats. If you can get crit rate on any of these substats in addition to the things I just mentioned, then go for it. Absolutely, it will help a lot. But your priority is attack first and foremost if you were kind of in the early to mid game stage. Now, when you start to get later in the game and you can actually farm more reliably, you're farming stage 18, maybe 17 in the gear raids, and you can actually get reliable myth drops, then you'll probably want to aim for gear more like this. So this is Curse Set. I've got some crit rate subs. Again, my overall stats are not great, but I am beginning to pick up some crit rate subs and some flat attack. You could even at this point go for a crit rate main, so long as it has an attack bonus substat, but you do really want to prioritize your attack bonus, and you don't want to sacrifice it too much for crit rate. So I would still focus attack bonus as the priority. Try to pick up as much crit rate as you can get. I have a broken weapon set here just because the subs are way better rolled, as you can see here. But in general, I would try to make a set on the left to get the attack bonus. Try to get either 3 attack bonus mains or 1 crit rate and 2 attack bonus mains, and try to get 100% crit rate via the rest of the subs. Once you're near or at 100% crit rate and you've got a decent amount of bonus attack, the way I justify bonus attack is by at least double the white number. So ideally it will be at least 8k, but hey, more is better. And you've got 100% crit rate, then you can start to work on some crit damage. Zelus does not need any attack speed, so it's fairly easy to gear him there. Rage regen will help, but it's quite slow. It will save you some extra seconds, especially if your rage regen is fairly low. Anything under 50% even is not going to make a huge difference. It will save you a few seconds, not a great deal more than that. I'll go into that in detail in another video in future. As for gear sets, I've kind of already touched on it, but just to elaborate a bit further, the best sets for Zelus are going to be Styx, but primarily the Curse set. Soulbound Arcana is good, but it does require him to ult many times, so it doesn't really work for Zelus. He does have a fairly high rage cap, so I do think Curse is still the best set for him. Ancient Wrath will work quite well as well. It does give him a whole bunch of crit damage, making it easier to just tunnel vision attack all the way late game, as you only get these sets in 19 to 21. But overall, I would suggest strongly the Curse set to maximize your damage output. On the weapon side of things, for once, I would not recommend the Warlord set. This is usually the best just go-to set for any DPS in the game. Only dropping from 19 to 21. The reason it's not good for Zelus is because it has 30 attack speed, which he just doesn't benefit from. And the attack bonus is 25, the same as Calamity. So you're better off putting a Warlord set on someone else and just giving Zelus a Calamity set. So from these sets, there's only really 2 choices, Annihilating Might or Calamity. Again, he doesn't benefit from Whirlwind. In the earlier stages, you just want to give him either Deadly Aim or Savage Strike. So yeah, pretty simple to gear Zelus. There's not much more to say about that. And finally, in regards to building Zelus artifacts. So he does have his own tailored artifact, the Zelus manuscript. And as I mentioned earlier, on the Forerunner server, it did not work. Hopefully this has been fixed for the global release. I would be kind of surprised if they hadn't, but do check the comments. I'm sure someone will have got it and tested and let us know. So thank you in advance, anyone who was able to do that. And I will update a pinned comment if someone does, or if I find out through testing myself whether it works. But aside from Zelus manuscript, in the myth tier, there are a number of really good myth artifacts that you can give Zelus. So Ajax's Rage gives him a whole bunch of crit damage on crit hits, which is pretty good. It's just extra crit damage. Skull of Desecration is probably my favorite AoE mage set, just because it massively increases the damage done in AoE. 25% without any dupes is a lot of damage. Then there is also the Tear of Starlight, which increases his attack by 20%, but when your health drops below 8%, it reduces to 10%. But I think my preference for Zelus, especially if you're lucky enough to have a Morrigan, or even if you're running him with just an Aeon, is the Blue Sea Ice Ring. When dealing damage, there is a 25% chance of slowing down the enemy by 50% for 2 seconds. Zelus does quite rapid damage instances in a massive AoE. Every single second he's going to be hitting everyone in a big AoE. Lots of chances to proc the Blue Sea Ice Ring. So in my opinion, if you want to kind of apply the Curse Lord benefit of bonus damage to slowed enemies, the Blue Sea Ice Ring on Zelus is actually a really good option. If you have someone else slowing, then you don't need to do this, of course. And if he's your main damage dealer, you're not using him as a secondary or a tertiary damage dealer, then Skull of Desecration is probably my go-to pick. But generally, all of them are pretty good, and the stats from the mythic ones are going to be really good. So if you have a choice of any of these, or a legendary one, just take these. The stat bonus is going to help a lot with the extra attack. From the legendary artifacts, I would only really strongly recommend one of them, which is the Ominous Hourglass. Dealing AoE damage increases the hero's AoE damage by 1%, can stack up to 3 times and last for 3 seconds. Zelus will just have this easily capped out all the time. It's not a massive amount of damage, but when you get duplicates, it's a lot higher. But once again, as always, I suggest do not focus too heavily on legendary artifacts. It will eat your mithril like nothing else. And when you do get to the mythic artifacts, you're going to require so much mithril. So I would advise being patient if you can and waiting until you get hold of some of these artifacts. And I would never suggest focusing on any of the epic ones. Just give him something that gives attack and don't upgrade it at all. Perhaps you can upgrade the Ominous Artifact to +10 if you really want to get some extra stats, but I strongly suggest focusing these too far as it will just eat your mithril. So let's talk about where you can use Zelus. Well, it's pretty simple. In my opinion at least, Zelus has 2 main areas where he is really good, and there are a couple of other areas where he's okay, but it's nothing special. So the okay areas is Tide. He does have BP, he does have a reasonably high BP score, and he is an AoE mage. That's the 2 things you need to progress in Tide. Once it starts to get harder, it gets harder like around 80 plus, so it's a while away for global players yet, but you do need AoE mages for a lot of that, and you do need high BP as the main thing. The next up is the resource raids of gold and experience. He does really good, reliable AoE damage, so of course Zelus is incredibly good for the gold raids, but they're not super hard content, so it doesn't really matter all that much. And you can kind of use him in group arena as well, but personally I think he is too expensive for group arena, and you're likely going to lose the early waves, which can be very important. So finally, that brings us to the 2 areas where Zelus is best, which in my opinion are Gear Raid 1 and the Faction Trial, the basic trial. Gear Raid 1 is of course AoE mage content. You need to be doing as much AoE magic damage as you possibly can, but largely there's just a lot of enemies and you need to deal AoE damage. But just so you can get a comparison, I'll turn Power of Dominance on and we'll use Morrigan and we'll see how they compare to one another. So for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to place Zelus at the same time as Morrigan, and we're going to see at the end of this run who has the most damage dealt. And we'll see how close it is, because it is quite telling. It's interesting to see. Bear in mind, she is a legendary lord, and she's in my better gear, and she has 6 promotions. So she does have quite a leg up on Zelus, and she has more skill ups as well. So we are expecting Morrigan to outperform Zelus by a long way. But I want to show that Zelus is not a bad legendary. He is very good, and he does have his own benefits. And he is also amplifying Morrigan's damage. This is why I see Zelus as like a secondary or even a tertiary mage to use. His damage bonuses really do help a lot. Even if he's not doing the most in the group, he is applying a valuable debuff, and he is doing good damage. It's not bad at all. Alright, and we have the final big wave approaching, so I can ult with Dolores, and then now they're close enough, I can ult with Zelus. Mine is awakened free, so he does have 12 seconds on his ultimate, which is really nice. So there we go. You can see they've just blasted through stage 18. I do have Power of Dominance on, and we'll have a look at the stat screen to see how they performed. Okay, so this is the damage screen at the end. As you can see, as expected, Morrigan did beat him. However, he is helping Morrigan. He is reducing the enemy's resistance to magic by 10%, which is helping her quite a lot. He has no skill ups versus her near full skill ups, and he is missing the final promotion. So if he were in her gear, which is better, if he had the full promotions and if he had skill ups, I think he could easily be on par with Morrigan. So I think he's definitely a good damage dealer. He can definitely do a great job, and you should 100% not ignore him for Gear Raid 1. Just because he shines in more specific uses does not make him a bad hero. He is just tailored specifically for this kind of content. Besides Gear Raid 1, I like to use Zelus in this, which is the basic trial. He is really good in this tile right here, facing to the right in the final 2 stages. These stages, you have a big row of the fallen defenders just lined up on either side here, and it's really difficult to kill them before they get to the rest of the group. These guys do have a passive shield around them that massively reduces magic damage taken. That covers Zelus. There's not too much more I want to go over. I wouldn't suggest using him in arena or campaign unless you really need an AoE damage option. Again, he's not bad, it's just the cost makes things a bit tricky with timings. But if you do need to use him, or if you want to use him, I would strongly suggest using a cost generation hero. So that's it for the video. As a summary, I definitely recommend using Zelus. He's really good in Gear Raid 1. That's the place he shines. You may think, well, he's a legendary and he's only good in one area. It doesn't matter. There are 3 Gear Raids, and Gear Raid 1 is the only way you can get weapons and armor. So it is very important. Building a hero who's only really good in one area is still very valuable. So I wouldn't overlook him just because he shines in a particular piece of content. I think it's fine. I would like to say, however, I do think he falls off a bit to the very end game. In stages 19 to 21 right now, Zelus is not as good as the later legendary mages that have not yet been introduced. Something I've been guilty of is comparing him to Vierna and Lasir and some of the other mages that haven't been added to the game yet. It's easy to devalue him because you have those heroes in mind. I do think Vierna overall is a significantly better mage than Zelus, but that doesn't mean he's bad. It just means that she's really overpowered practically. So Zelus is still great. He still shines very well. He does shine significantly better early game towards mid, maybe even slightly late game, and he can be good in the end game as well. We just need his artifact to be fixed. If it is fixed, then he should be really good all the way through to stage 21 in Gear Raid 1. Even perhaps he might be completely necessary. It might be nearly impossible to beat those later stages without him until we have Lasir introduced to the game, and that could be a very long time as he was only added fairly recently to the Forerunner server. So, assuming they did fix the Zelus manuscript, Zelus will be the only hero in the game who can actually reduce healing received by enemies, which will make him incredibly important and a staple hero in the late game Gear Raid 1 stages. So, that's it for the video. I hope it was helpful to you guys. If you have any questions or suggestions or tips about Zelus, then please leave them in the comments below, as I'm sure they will help other people out. Thank you guys very much for watching. Have a great day, take care, and bye-bye.